let's start again with the 1 minute meditation, with like the 2 minute introduction to the 1 minute meditation. Uh, so I did this retreat recently at Land of Medicine Buddha over 3 days, but one each month. And I think that was one of the takeaways that a lot of people found beneficial, though a lot of the people were brand new to this type of practice. So yeah, set yourself into meditation posture. And remember that nice, if you hadn't heard it before, remember that nice. How many people had heard that before about the hands and the thumbs, the symbolism? Some people. So it's a very nice reminder that your left hand is wisdom. Left hand's also, they say, the feminine side. A part of, especially Vajrayana Buddhism, is the idea of embracing the feminine and the masculine inside all of us. And so the feminine is said to be the wisdom side, your left side. And then the right side is the compassion, action side, or the masculine side, which at first seems a little different from, in our culture, we often think of the feminine as the more compassionate. Anyway, the whole point of it, though, in Vajrayana Buddhism is to unite them within yourself. So in some sense, it doesn't matter which gender is associated with which. But anyway, interdependence on your left, and then on top of that, compassion, and then your thumbs touching is concentration. And then set that in your left. The other thing you probably may have heard is that the pressure between your thumbs is a kind of gauge as to your level of concentration. And if it's too tight, you're pressing, generally you're kind of too tense, too focused, sometimes too focused. And too loose, that's often when you get distracted if your thumbs drift apart. So you can measure your attention sometimes just by the pressure in your thumbs there. So anyway, relax your shoulders, your face, your eyes. Straighten your spine. Tilt your head down slightly and mostly close your eyes. And then set the motivation. There's something I often think and say when I'm leading meditations is there's nothing better we could be doing with our time right now. And we can't always say that. I certainly don't always feel that way. But when I'm doing meditation, leading meditation, participating in meditation retreat, there's a kind of sigh of relief in my body, my mind. It's like, okay, at least I know there's nothing better I could be doing right now. So sometimes that's what I think in meditation. There's nothing better I could be doing right now. To try and steer my mind toward its best qualities and acknowledge that I'm fundamentally good and that my delusions are the shallowest level of my psyche, and that you can diminish and eliminate them actually just by steering your mind towards its natural goodness, its better qualities, kindness, generosity, compassion. And whatever motivation you had, everybody here, it's a big deal. It's a lot of work getting up, and I'm sure there's many other things you could be doing today. So just think about your motivation. What made you come here today or watch on Zoom? And then once again, also generate this sense of refuge in your good qualities. Again, to remind ourselves we mostly do good things. We're mostly kind and beneficial to others. And when we're not, it's usually by accident or because of bad habits. And then to recall the people we admire who have gone further than we have in developing those qualities, or maybe even perfecting them. People like the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, some caretakers, mothers, some mothers we know, maybe your own. And they worked at it. That's the part of this is to think they worked at it just like we are right now. We're creating the causes for a kind, happy, generous mind, just as they did. And then let's just focus on the breath for 1 minute, that 1 minute meditation. And choosing the spot, whether it's the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen, which promote either concentration in the nostrils, openness in the chest, or groundedness. And choose one of those places to watch your breath. And remember that you will get distracted. If you're one of the people who don't, then you already know that. Congratulations. So, for the rest of us, we will get distracted, and just let the distractions pass by without pulling them close, without pushing them away, and steer our minds back to our breath. So just for 1 minute. That meditation, but in a way, we are going to remain in meditation, for the rest of the session. That there's different levels of meditation. And one is hearing, listening, and contemplating, and then eventually having some understanding that transcends the words. Session is until when is this first session? Till 12. Oh, that's perfect. Okay. So we'll probably take a little break. So we were on this first topic of what is the mind last night, and we got through the mental factors, and I was gratified to hear some people found that beneficial. Uh, and now we're on the second part. So we were focusing on the mental factors earlier, the contents of the mind, in particular, the way that when we think of these five omnipresent mental factors of contact, feeling, perception, attention, and urge, um, it really helps us to better understand our mind and to gain more control over it, especially by realizing that at the step of feeling that you have a great deal of control. That's when you really have the most control. Sometimes they say that's the only place in those omnipresent factors, that you have a chance to stop the automatic cascade of your thoughts and actions. And so some people shared that helped with them, and I'm glad that worked. Now we're looking at the content, the container of the mind, uh, consciousness, awareness. Uh, there weren't any MRIs in the world until the last 30 years or so. I often like to think of the whole span of humanity, like 200,000 years. There's so many things that were brand new in the last few years after 200,000 years. And definitely one of them is MRI machines. How many people have done that? They're very common now, the MRIs. Well, not everybody, that's good. Where I am, they're like constantly getting MRIs now. Um, and so, but before MRIs and those kind of studies, the Buddhism relied heavily on the inner subjective experience to establish its models for consciousness, what consciousness is. And, this is where Buddhism can differ from and augment science, is that emphasis on subjective experience as a valid scientific instrument. Thupten Jinpa actually talks, everybody about Thupten Jinpa is Dalai Lama's translator, an extraordinary scholar and yogi on his own. Um, he's very gentle, but in his like critiques, but he says that for a long time he worked on these dialogues. The Dalai Lama has dialogues with scientists for 30 years, the Mind and Life dialogues, I think even longer. And he said that there's one type of science that we all know of, which is like the controlled experiment, especially using instruments where we use some kind of external measure like an MRI to see what's happening in your brain. But he said that there's a longer tradition of science, which is just anything that's reproducible. Anything that people did systematically that's reproducible. And in that sense, science goes back much, much further back than the Western Enlightenment. Even like fishermen, figuring out the most effective ways to fish. And he kind of gently suggests that leveraging our inner subjective experience is really critical to understanding the mind, and to augment Western science with those ways that we see our minds directly. We talked a little bit about that idea that the mind is fundamentally good, like a very beautiful principle of Buddhism. But when I've talked to different people at different levels of experience in Buddhism, it's quite difficult to establish that. There is some scientific evidence that the mind is fundamentally good. There's a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Anybody seen that book by Robert Sapolsky? That one basically says, when animals get what they need, a little bit of food, a little safe place, they're totally happy. Like there's no anxiety, no neuroses. And so there is some scientific evidence that not just humans but creatures are fundamentally good, when they're not stressed out. The other piece of evidence is that uh, when people see somebody in need, that their first instinct is to help. Now, people don't always help, and there's a lot of ways to explain that. But if they measure just what's their like knee-jerk reaction, it's to help. So that's encouraging, but it's not definitive. And when I've talked to people about this fundamental goodness of the mind, we call it Buddha nature, in Buddhism, which is kind of funny. So many things we tack Buddha onto that the Buddha probably wanted, like including Buddhism, right? The Buddha didn't call it Buddhism; he just called it the truth. It's like this is the truth I discovered, like inner and outer truths. One way. Um, and it's the same thing with Buddha nature. I would think he would be so critical of that. You'd say it's everyone's nature, actually. It's not Buddha, it's actually everybody's nature. And of course, it means like a Buddha's nature, not the Buddha's nature. But I think it's pretty easy to understand that. Anyway, for anyone who's probed it, I think the only real way, like when I've talked to people about this idea, the only real way to get a taste of it and some conviction is actually to experience it in meditation. I don't think you can definitively prove that people are fundamentally good. And there's quite a lot of evidence to the contrary if you read the news and so on. Um, so that's why we do these meditations. In these meditations, which are put right up front in the sequence, we try to explore some of these subtler levels of consciousness where you discover a non-conceptual sense of who you are, and a sense of who you are that's beneath perceptions, beneath thought, um, even beneath your personality. Who am I without my personality? And the motivation isn't just, as I was saying last time, the motivation to do this isn't just for the adventure or out of curiosity, although it is an adventure and it is really interesting, but to discover this wellspring of inner happiness. When we get to the topic of refuge, the way I approach refuge, you, it don't rely on the core refuges we talk about in Buddhism of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but there are refuges that we talk about in Buddhism that you can still rely on even if you're not religious. And one of them is this inner happiness, the inner goodness, that there's something right there within yourself to find all the time, although you need a tiny bit of space. Um, that's happiness, a source of happiness. And so Mahayana Buddhists believe in this continuity of mind, that there's a conviction that your mind has existed forever and it's going to live on forever. And because of this, you feel a responsibility to evolve this like ever-changing mind towards genuine happiness, wisdom, and compassion. And if you don't believe in such a vast time scale for your existence, it's a good question as to whether you can still conjure up the same sense of awe and responsibility in your practice. Many people listening have that, so you can kind of compare those two things in your mind, well, with and without those kind of Buddhist refuges. And so, um, one method for me that's worked, that without having to rely on the idea that I've lived forever, is to look at the present moment. So, right down to its most subtle level. So, to have an experience in the mind right now without worrying about any existence before or after that moment. And so, there's many ways to break through to this subtler aspect of the mind. And I'm going to share them a few in this session, this meditation session we're about to do. Um, I don't mention this in the book, but these are meditations we call Mahamudra, nature of mind. And they're actually some of the most advanced meditations in Tibetan Buddhism. But Lama Yeshe would teach them early on in the path. And so did my teachers, like Benpo Rene. And I found they're really, really useful for people to start up front, especially if you don't have this more like religious devotional aspect to your practice. And so let's just do them and see. I actually one time I led this as its own little retreat in class, and I called it 1 minute. They're very, very short. To try to distill some of the Mahamudra meditations just down to like a few sentences. But it's surprising, like people who aren't Buddhists, who many of them haven't even meditated, sometimes they do manage to have some experience right away. Okay, so let's get into these. We're going to look at like 3 or 4 different models of the mind to see if we can experience the mind directly. And the first one is what we call the clear and knowing mind. Probably anybody who's heard that definition before? Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to talk about clear and knowing me. One way is that the clarity of your mind is its ability to model the world within your consciousness. Like we were talking about last night, how there's no red, there's no sound in the world. So the clarity of your mind is that way that it sort of models consciousness, reflects the world. And then another way to think about it is this knowing aspect of the mind. Second quality is its power to understand and engage with those models. You see, both of these emphasize that the two things are both happening within your mind. It's like we're not really talking about an outside world because no one actually experiences the outside world. All we experience is that model within our mind. And so as you start to recognize and observe these two aspects of your mind, um, you can start to become more aware of that encompassing awareness in which they arise. So let's try that a short version of that meditation. Again, we're kind of still in the meditation session, so just reaffirm your posture, um, half close your eyes, straighten your spine. And then just relax into whatever passes through your mind. And now, as you're just comfortable with what's passing through our mind without grasping onto it, try to gain a little bit of distance and see if you can let go of thoughts, feelings, perceptions. And it's okay that we're still hearing things. I'm hearing my voice, the birds outside, voices in the home. Let's see if you can let them fade back and Just look at the mind itself in which those sounds appear. See if you can notice that your mind has a clarity to it. This might feel like the reflective face of a mirror, or like the transparency of a lens. So as thoughts, feelings, perceptions arise, notice how they appear like reflections or refractions within this clear mind. And then see if you can observe the mind's knowing quality. That the mind has a direct way of knowing that goes beyond labels and concepts. Try to become aware of both, to rest in the clear and knowing aspects of your mind in any way that you see them. So that's one way to see it as clear. And we're going to try another one, which is the space of your mind. So not everyone thinks visually, and the meditation still works. If you don't, if anyone doesn't, you can ask a question later. For people who do think visually, as you experience perceptions, thoughts, feelings, they may appear to come and go within some kind of a mental space. So as objects arise in the space, they may seem to emerge from some kind of mental material that they then dissolve back into, almost like shapes that are oozed out from the 3D printer and then melted back down. Or you might see that objects seem to arise instantaneously, like a holographic reflection, whatever 3D reflection would be. That's in some ways how you can see the mind working. And so in this next short meditation, we're just going to watch with an open mind and find our own metaphors for the space of our mind. So relax your mind again, but let your thoughts, feelings, perceptions remain at the distance. Next, we steer our attention to the space in which thoughts appear. So examine this space with curiosity and open mind. Does the space of your consciousness appear dim or bright? Is it clear or obstructed? Does the space of your mind stay the same or does it change? Does the space of your mind have a size? Is your mind contained within your skull or within your whole body? Does it fill this whole room where we're sitting, or where we're sitting at home? And as we start to think about the neighborhood we're in, the city, our country, the planet, even the whole universe, does the mind become as big as those things? Does our mind grow to the size of what we imagine? Does the space of your mind overlap with other minds, or does it feel separate from them? Now let's watch how objects appear within the space of the mind. The signals from your eyes, ears, imagination, and memory transform into forms, sounds, other perceptions that take shape in your awareness. Whatever texture and color the mind has gets sculpted into the form of what we perceive. So now notice how these mental objects rise and fall within your consciousness. And that you can bring each appearance closer to examine it or let it fade. So now relax out of seeing the mind as space. And look at it in yet another way, to a contemplation of time. So see your mind now as a stream of conscious moments, packets of perception. So notice how each moment of consciousness has a beginning touches the past, and an end that touches the future, and a middle with a direction. So what we call now, normally it has some duration. It's not instantaneous. It's, say, 30th of a second, 20th of a second, maybe more. So now what we do in this meditation is we see those chunks of mental activity streaming past. So take the current one and cut it in half. Cut a moment of consciousness in half. And then slice one of those halves again. And do this again and again in your imagination until you break through to a singularity of time sliced infinitely thin. So here there's no past because it's already gone. There's no future because it's not here yet. So see now if you can let go of your analysis and just open up to whatever direct experience you have, the mystery of the present moment. And relax your mind back from that way for one more short meditation. So again, see these moments of consciousness coming and going that have some duration. Sometimes it helps to label them. We did in the meditation yesterday. That's a memory, that's a plan, that's a feeling, that's a sound. And so now what we do is we try to become aware of any gaps between our thoughts. And so see if it's possible to rest in these moments between grasping at ideas and objects, where it's another place to become a subtler aspect. So just try that for a minute or so to rest in the gaps between thoughts. Gently steer ourselves back to the everyday aspects of awareness, our senses, our body, the room, objects, try not to completely let go of the deeper aspects of consciousness that you touched during your meditation. So even as your mind fills with thoughts, plans, movement, try to remember the subtler awareness or ghost that underlies ordinary experience. When we remember this subtler experience in everyday life, it can bring a shimmering sense of aliveness and presence to everything you encounter. It's very difficult to define happiness. In some ways, we don't have a definition of it, but it's like you know it when you see it, you know it when you feel it. Um, and these meditations, they gradually can really work, um, I think, to bring you in touch with that more. Does anybody have? I think we could take some time now for questions, comments, observations. Yeah, do we want to use the microphone? Oh, my microphone. Oh, sorry. Still. Oh, I was trying to play louder too. Um, yeah. Does anybody have any questions, comments, observations? Well, I did write about them in the book. There's an audio book. I also have a community called Train a Happy Mind that you can join by for free or by donation. Where I have when I led this as a retreat at Rajapani Institute last year, and a volunteer cut out the meditations, put them there. So if you want, I guess this one will probably be published to your. Do you publish to your YouTube or not? I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So yeah, they'll be on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. But it's a nice little collection because it's actually quite difficult to get this information. It's sort of buried, a number of these are buried in an incredible book called The Gelug Kargyu Practice of Mahamudra. Not the catchiest title in the world for a book, one of the best books I ever read. And it's a commentary on these Mahamudra techniques. Um, at the Panchen Lama, the first Panchen Lama. It was actually like the fifth Panchen Lama. All of these things are so like complicated. Um, but then my teacher Venerable Rene gave us a lot of instruction, and then they can be really, really distilled. They're meant to be actually um, quite pith, as they say, like very succinct instructions in order to gain an experience of your mind. Milarepa um, made some beautiful poems about these practices too. So, yeah. Questions or comments? People online too. All right. Well, if not, we can move on. Some people, it takes some time to have an experience of the mind. Uh, you hear those words, but you kind of draw a blank because we're so used to just seeing the contents of our mind and never the container. So one of the very best Buddhist instructions I've ever heard is "You are not your thoughts." It's such a great instruction, and I feel very lucky, getting to share with so many people these ideas because for many people it's the first time they ever hear that. You are not your thoughts. And it's just, it's like a shock. Because actually people feel very bad about themselves when you have a thought, right? I remember asking my teacher, Ben Renee, like on retreat, because on retreat sometimes you have really extreme dreams, thoughts. I'd ask Ben Renee, like, what should I do with this? He said, well, just let it pass through you, you know? If you have a thought and you don't act on it, in fact, you feel it and it doesn't seem very beneficial to you, it won't have any effect on your mind if you just let it pass by. It's only when you identify with it, you think, oh, I am that type of thought, or I have to do the thing the thought is telling me to do. Yeah, microphone.
Thanks. I've been wanting to ask this about the thoughts. Like, how do you know when a thought, though, is true? Because, like, I need to make dinner. I mean, that's a thought.
What does true mean? What do you think true means?
Something that's real, something that I need to do.
So,
I mean, I'm thinking of a thought that's an action.
yeah.
Um,
So in a way, nothing's real, right?
okay.
Like Venerable Rene, and it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? But in the real that you're talking about, Venerable Rene once said to us, he said, what if life has no meaning but what you give it? So I think it's a choice, right? Like, is like thoughts, they're things that pass through your mind that occur due to an extraordinarily vast chain of causes and conditions, and quite a lot of it unhelpful, right? Quite a lot of it are the media, advertising, various types of power control. Um, so, in the Buddhist perspective, you would look at anything that pops through your head and think, is this harmful or beneficial? And then start to identify um, delusions, which we'll get to when we get to the topic, well, the topic you call suffering, that I call, am I the most important person in the universe? Which is like a kind of a more attractive name for that topic. Because if you start to have names and labels for the types of thoughts you have, and it's not the thought itself. Like, you could have a thought, oh, I want to make dinner for my family, and because I like to care for them, you know, and it brings me joy to care for them. That would be beneficial. If you have the thought, oh, not again, I have to make dinner for my family, like, what drudgery, and why is the woman always the one to do it, and so on, like, those kind of thoughts would be quite delusional and harmful. They're not nice. So neither way, whether or not you make the dinner is less important than how you think about it, right? There was this, I was actually just writing about this because I'm working on my next book now, which is a relationship book. And I had this quote um, from Marshall Rosenberg. Did anyone ever read Nonviolent Communication, this book by Marshall Rosenberg? So there's a great story in there where this woman comes to him and she says, I hate making dinner for my family. What should I do? And Marshall says, oh, just tell them you'll stop making dinner. And she said, what? He said, yeah, just go do that. See what happens. You don't want to do it, so don't do it. So she went, and she said to her family, she sat them all down at dinner time, had not made dinner. And she said, I'm not making dinner anymore. She's like, I hate doing this. It feels like an obligation. And the whole family were so relieved. They all said, oh, thank God. Like, we can tell how much you hate it. And she's like, really? They said, yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll take turns, like, whatever. But, I'm glad, we're all really glad you told us that. So what does it mean that a thought's real? Like it's real to you. Every thought is real to you. But is it harmful? Is it beneficial? And do you need to follow it? That takes like really deep wisdom. That's kind of like our whole job through our whole life, right? It's figuring that out. Um, it's beautiful. Like, I think we've all probably had a thought sometime, like, I want to kill someone, even, right? I don't think any of us have acted on it listening. Um, And we've all had thoughts like, I want to end war and poverty and, make the world a better place and cease every type of harmful behavior in my mind and body. Which ones do you want to follow? Gain some insight into that. Good question. Any other questions, reflections on the mind? You see, we haven't even got to the first topic yet. This is a good preamble. They say with the lamrim that each topic naturally leads you toward thinking of the next, if you're meditating in an effective way. So yeah, why don't we move on to precious life? Do we normally take some break with the 2-hour session, or we could just go? What do you think? Just go. It's okay. Just go. Okay. But anything else? Did anyone have any other comments or thoughts on the mind as we're sitting there? Okay. Let's move on to precious life. So I almost tried to skip this topic. I founded the podcast with a friend of mine who's a very devoted practitioner, also audio producer. And I almost skipped this topic because I could not figure out how to make it work if you're not Buddhist, precious life. Because the traditional approach to precious life in Buddhism is to think about your infinite past and future lives and how precious this one is. Um, I've had infinite past lives. I've been a god. I've been in a hell realm. I've been a turtle. I've been a ghost. Finally, I'm human. And they say this is the best form. But my karma is exhausting itself right now, and there's no guarantee I'll have this good form in the future. So I better take advantage of it. If you're not Buddhist and you weren't raised in a culture that accepts past and future lives, karma, then that way of thinking about how precious your life is doesn't make much sense. And I'm pretty sure everybody, even if you've been Buddhist for decades, has struggled with this. It's not, um, most of us, we can't see our past lives, right? And we didn't grow up believing in them. So I kind of grappled with this both as a Buddhist and also then trying to reframe the lamrim as authentically as possible without having to take recourse in those founding ideas of the precious life. And so I remembered this great quote I heard when I was in college by Voltaire. Does anybody know Voltaire, the writer? Um, this is an extraordinary person in the Enlightenment. Voltaire was in many ways almost single-handedly responsible for ending duels. Before for hundreds of years, if your honor was questioned as a man in Europe, then even a very small insult, you would have to defend your honor and you would challenge the other man to a duel. And so you'd have like two friends who were kind of like the there's a name for it, but they were the ones who kind of got all the details together. You'd agree on your weapons, how many bullets you had, where you're going to meet, how far you stand apart. And so you go try to kill yourself over some minor insult at dinner. And so tons of guys were dying and being wounded for hundreds of years, and nobody knew how to end this practice because it was a cultural norm. It finally ended because Voltaire made fun of it. And it's a very good thing to understand. Like he wrote an essay and other stories that made people who duel look like idiots, just look like foolish idiots, which actually they are, right? You are a foolish idiot for gambling your life on a minor. And it's good to remember today. The reason I bring this up is it's very good to remember today because so many people are trying to kind of fight injustice with kind of, logic and earnest building up piles of evidence. And if you haven't noticed, it doesn't work to win arguments. But one thing that really does work is to make things look ridiculous. Like when you make somebody who thinks they're very serious and powerful look like a fool and denormalize that behavior, society changes. It's extraordinary. And many of them were like these thinkers. Dickens did it too, right? Writing Tale of Two Cities. Like it's extraordinary the power artists really have to change the world. And I don't know what the media, it may not be the novel anymore. You might need to make a really good YouTube video or something like that. Go on Jon Stewart. I don't know. But anyway, that's a little tiny detour, but I'd like to mention that because, we are all trying to change the world for the better, but we don't always know how. So anyway, with respect to the precious life with Voltaire, I remembered hearing something in college. He said, it's no more surprising to be born twice than to be born once. Isn't that amazing? Like, it's just so, it's like a mic drop kind of statement because you just realize, oh my God, I've been so taking for granted this life. Whether you believe in infinite lives or whether you believe you just have one, it's quite a to revelation to hear that quote because it just makes you realize, whoa, I have really been taking this life for granted. It's so extraordinary to have one life, just to have one life, to be alive, to have one life, to have a body, to be in this beautiful world, planet, be able to breathe and talk and hug and have nice meals and friends. Um, that's it, right? That's a precious life. Like that's so extraordinary. Everything on top of that is just kind of like gravy, right? Like, oh wow, maybe there are past and future lives. That's cool. I don't have evidence for it, but we definitely know we're alive right now. We're all looking at each other. We're having a good time, mostly maybe somewhere. Um, that's extraordinary, and it made me that has stuck with me for whatever for 30 years, and it came out as one of the most salient points for someone to appreciate their precious life, whether or not they're Buddhist. The other quote is by another Enlightenment thinker, Gottfried Leibniz. Um, he said, "Why is there something rather than nothing?" I just love this quote. It's also so beautiful, and it's such a reset. I think about this every day, also, because all there is something. Sadly, so many of us believe in nothing. Robert Thurman talks about this a lot, right? He says, like, we think we came from nothing, we go to nothing, that when you die, it's just like a switch turns off and you're not suffering, you're not feeling pleasure anymore. That is so delusional, right? Because all we have evidence for is something. Nothing actually refers to something that doesn't exist, right? The word nothing means things that aren't there, that aren't, when you're asking what's real, that we know is not real. The only thing we know is not real is nothing, because it's a word that refers to all the things that don't exist, which is nothing. Nothing. There aren't all things. There's not even one thing that doesn't exist. There's nothing, no thing. So why is there something rather than nothing? We're never going to have an answer to that question. Science will never have an answer to why. We have an answer to what. And that answer of what keeps getting bigger and more beautiful. And that's the other dimension to think about the precious life is this miracle of our place in the universe. I was saying this 200,000 years. They don't know. Sometimes they say 200,000, 100,000, 300,000. I say 200,000 because it's kind of in the middle that humanity has existed for 200,000 years. Um, to feel gratitude to those ancestors, here in Santa Fe, I feel it somehow it's kind of it's easier for me to kind of project what this space maybe was like 10,000, 30, because it doesn't look that different. I don't think actually it hasn't changed that much. And you have the expanse out to the mountains, so you could really think of people. Oh, and I found a little obsidian flake, while I was hiking. Like, oh, that is somebody 5,000 years ago. I took that off to hunt. So there's an extraordinary amount of gratitude in this practice of the precious life and thinking about all the people that came before. You know, all the foods we eat, like corn, grain, they were originally they were all very apples. They were like tiny little, almost inedible nubbins. And people around 20,000 years ago just started choosing the ones that, even before agriculture, choosing the ones that were a little bit more richer, more bigger, nutrient denser, and spreading those seeds even before we had farms. And so they say it took 5,000 years for the fruits, vegetables, grains that we eat, the really delicious ones we have now, really big, juicy ones. It took 5,000 years for humans to cultivate those before agriculture. And almost everybody who made those choices saw no change in their own life. It was so subtle, those differences, that they didn't even realize what they were doing. But we have them to thank. Like, so when I have I had an orange this morning, I had a banana, a grapefruit, a little bit of grapefruit. Each of those, I think, wow, 5,000 years. So it's these kind of thoughts. You can think for the precious life, all the course of evolution, then cosmic evolution. You can go further and further, and we'll do it in the meditation in a minute. So then to get a little bit grounded, there's this I think, very cosmic level of appreciating the human life. It's very beautiful. But then also there's just the practical question of, like, what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? And if you're Buddhist, you might have heard Lama Zopa. This is one of the first things I heard when I was a Buddhist. Lama Zopa said, first thing when you wake up in the morning, think, I'm so glad I didn't die last night. Have any of you heard that before? So that's pretty amazing. And of course, as we get older, like, that's more and more real, right? That realization. Um, but that said, I think all of us know somebody younger, no matter, my daughter luckily doesn't, she's only 14. But beside that, we all know people younger that died younger than us in our 20s, in our teens, I have people who died in high school, 20s, 30s, 40s. So what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? I get asked over and over again because of this book. It's so funny when you write a book, because this is like, I don't know, 70,000 words or something. But then one of the things people constantly ask is, oh, what's the one thing? Like, what's the one thing I can do to have a happier mind? I was like, well, someone asked Matthew Ricard that question. And he said, Matthew Ricard, he's this French monk, very well. And he said, well, it's not one thing. He said, and it'll take you your whole life, but it's the most valuable thing you can do, and it will truly make you happy. That said, when people do say, what's the one thing, I try to be nice. For some of us, we have a vow to answer any sincerely asked question. It's like one of our vows. So what I say is, well, it's this thing with the precious life, is to think about the first thing you do in the morning, and don't reach for your phone. That's about it, actually. Probably the best piece of advice is, like, connect with yourself. Because I have found from my own experience that a day that begins with distraction, seeking entertainment, praise, wealth, diving straight into work, which are all the things we do on our phones. I mean, good for you if you reach for your phone and, like, turn on a guided meditation, like, yay. But I don't think that's what most of us do, including myself, when I do that. So that's the main thing I say, is, like, if you can just connect with yourself for 5 minutes at the beginning of a day. And if you're someone attending retreats like this, then meditation might be a great way to do that. But other ways of going inward too. Any other ways that you can go inward? Exercise, but without music. Yoga, going for a run without music or podcast. Writing is a very effective way, right? Journal, automatic writing, where you wake up and you just start kind of writing whatever came to you. You go to the bathroom, come back, and then start writing. All these things are really good practices to connect with yourself and appreciate how precious your life is. And I've noticed, I mean, I do meditate every day, but there are some days I check email or stocks or something before, and it kind of ruins the whole day. I'm sorry to say. I mean, it's not a total disaster, but it's not that good of a day compared to if I spend time meditating first. It really, really changes your day to connect with yourself first. So, precious life makes you start to question, what am I going to do today? Life's so precious. I'm at the tip of 200,000 human beings. Like, what do I want to do today? So yeah, let's do that meditation. Okay, so get back into meditation posture. If you're in a chair, I'll try it. I'll try it the chair way this time, with your feet flat on the floor. It helps to really press your feet into the floor, really feel the earth. And so we already went through some of these preliminaries of posture, motivation, refuge, stabilizing on the breath. Let's at least stabilize on the breath uh, just for half a minute, 30 seconds. Focus on your breath. And for the purpose of this meditation, imagine that you've just woken up. For some of us, that was recent. For some of us, it's already 7, 8 hours away. And imagine that you've just woken up, and the very first thought that pops into your head is, "I'm so grateful to have another day alive, to have this body, a safe place to sleep, a modest amount of comfort and security, family, friends. Maybe I have everything I need to be happy." There's nothing better I could be doing with these few minutes right now than going inward to understand who I am beneath stimulation and stress, entertainment and thoughts. Getting to know the deep core of my awareness, to explore the mystery of being alive and aware right now. So, in meditating on the precious life, you reflect on your good fortune, but it's important to acknowledge that, of course, each of us face many hardships. But for a moment in this meditation, we try to practice gratitude for whatever we have, for simply being alive and aware, for our bodies and our senses through which we appreciate the beauty of the world, for whatever resources you have: food, shelter, safety, security, health, education, a job, friends and family. Many people don't have these things, and you're fortunate if you have some or all of these. Then we can feel gratitude that we've found an interest to go beyond striving, beyond competitiveness, beyond entertainment. So there's a place for all these things in life, but there's also something more. So we can feel grateful that such thoughts have arisen in our minds, and that we've each been exposed to ideas, teachers, friends who value inner happiness, who contemplate the worth of an existence that can rise above material accumulation. Then we can feel grateful that we're not only curious and interested in finding the deepest sources of life's meaning, but that we've each made an effort to pursue self-awareness, to read books, listen to teachers, and actually go on an inner adventure through meditation. To honestly probe what's inside our minds and discover how to be happy and how to be of genuine benefit to others. To remind ourselves that many people can't take for granted these things that we enjoy. People in severe poverty, people in wars, people in extreme climates, and people suffering political, racial, gender oppression. People afflicted by unquenchable addictions for food, sex, drugs, power, fame, wealth. So maybe you have everything you need to be happy, and you only need to make the effort to live this day aware of your precious life, remembering everything that you're grateful for. Now we contemplate our connection to the universe. So we're each sitting in the center of a universe that's 13.8 billion years old, with 100 billion galaxies. There are 100 billion stars in our own galaxy, the Milky Way, and 100 million of them have planets like ours circling their own burning star. One of them is our own sun, 4 billion years old, where life on its third planet, Earth, has existed for 3 billion years. Over that time, the scientific magic of evolution transformed simple chemicals into cells, worms, fish, snakes, dinosaurs, mammals, monkeys. And then humanity arrives at the very tip of history only 200,000 years ago. Imagine 10,000 generations of humans passing by. So many of them struggling, dying at birth, hungry, violent, afraid. And then you are born. So now, despite its drawbacks and discomforts and injustices, you're lucky enough to live in a world that's safer and more abundant for humans than it's ever been before. There's no evidence yet for any other life in the universe. So what if humanity is the pinnacle of the entire universe's evolution? What if we're the universe's sole way of knowing itself? If that's the case, what's a good way to spend today? What's the best way to prepare our minds to be happy, to live with dignity, meaning, and connection? It might be nothing more than what we're doing right now, going inward, probing our minds, cultivating the true causes of happiness in the present moment through gratitude and self-awareness. Then going out into the world to make deep connections with others, and make our fragile, beautiful world a little bit better for everyone else who shares it. So rest in these thoughts for a minute, your profound connection to all the universe and all of history, your gratefulness for being alive, and also how you make the most of this day. And then as you come out of the meditation, you can set an intention to being genuinely present and aware for the rest of the day, to not take things personally, to see that there's truth and meaning to be gained from even painful moments of conflict. And it's possible to stay aware and present without mindlessly reacting, to consider how we respond, to see the heartfelt needs, even in underlying tenderness, beneath our own and everyone else's actions, however imperfect. After this meditation, if you do it at the beginning of the day, you can go into the day with an intention to be present and aware. That's maybe this, and that maybe this is all you need to be happy. Then you can come out of the meditation. Does anybody have any comments or reflections on the precious life? Yeah, sure. Yeah, microphone.
This is Phyllis. Brothers Stendelrast is he's a monk, he's a Catholic monk. And for years, he went around lecturing about gratitude. And his statement, he has a short video that I watch frequently. And what he says at the beginning of it is so impactful. He says, each day is the first day of your life. And for the rest.
That's really good. Friend of mine had a I and my friend Sujata Aligar are the two main meditation teachers, like secular meditation teachers at the Kyoto Foundation near where I live. And she had a birthday party there, but she didn't just want to party; she wanted to have meditation at her birthday. And she had a lot of friends too. There were like a couple hundred people there. So she invited me to lead a meditation. She said, "Listen, I want you to lead the precious life meditation on my birthday for everybody. Some of them have never meditated, and that's what I think about on my birthday. I thought it'd be nice. So I did that. Like it was like a happy birthday meditation for them at a birthday party. And afterwards, it was very interesting because some people were really quite shaken by the meditation. They've never done a meditation like this. And one woman came up to me. She said, "Oh, I think I need to make some big changes in my life. I realize I need to make some big changes in my life." And I do think that happens when you do this meditation effectively. It really does sink in. So it's quite a paradox, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you realize this is it. This is the day I have. There may not be another one. That's what. That's what's. That's what. So you see, what you're pointing out is what I was mentioning. Is that with the lamrim, they say if you do the meditation effectively, it naturally leads you to the next topic. The next topic is impermanence. That life may not last, and so you clearly had that, that natural movement in your meditation. Because once you realize how precious your life is, you're like, "Ooh, you never know when it's going to end." That's the next topic we're going to move on to. But any other comments on precious life? I think you see it can be equally effective to do it this way. I even know some like tulkus, people who are reincarnated, um, or they say are reincarnated, and some of them are sort of like taking a life off. Like some of them have said to me, you know, oh, I was very highly realized in the last life. I was this great teacher. It's like, no, I just want to have a family and like relax and enjoy some things. So you can be super Buddhist, and then in some ways maybe not be as urgent as precious. There's no guarantee believing in past and future lives is going to give you an extraordinary urgency about this one. I mean, in so many ways, I think if you believe you have only one life to live, that will give you a very strong urgency about making the most of that life, and in some cases, more urgency than if you believe you have infinite ones in the future. Like, okay, maybe I'll take this life off and next life I'll be a monk. I have some people say that. I say it too, actually. But I think this life's good for me as a normal person. Um, anything else about precious life? Move on to impermanence then. This topic is actually the one I would almost always share with a person if they were totally unfamiliar with meditation, with Buddhism. They ask me, what's it about? Again, I was mentioning yesterday, we're not supposed to proselytize. So I have this friend. He's a professor. He's actually quite an esteemed professor. And one of these like hyper social people who must know like 30,000 people, he knows a vast amount of people. And he and his wife are always out, meeting people in every dimension of society. So we were at a party. We're actually in this kind of cool club called the Philosophers Club in Berkeley, where I live. I'm just kind of happy to be invited to that club. And we were at an event, and it was before the event started, and we were looking out over the hillside in Sausalito, this kind of North Bay, San Francisco, beautiful area. And he asked me what I was up to, and I said, "Oh, well, I'm publishing this book. I'm gonna publish this book that's coming out." He said, "Oh, what's it about?" So as I mentioned, we're not really supposed to proselytize at Buddhists. So many of my friends and colleagues, I'd never mentioned anything about Buddhism. But then since he asked, finally after knowing him like almost 30 years, I said, "Oh, well, I'm writing this book on, how to train a happy mind about analytical meditation." And he said, "Oh, what's that?" Okay. Well, I'll tell you, the topic I usually share with people is this impermanence. I said, look at that house on the hill there. Um, Notice how that house appears to you. It's like it's always been there. Like you don't naturally see where it came from, the people that planned it, raised the money, constructed it. Not to mention the indigenous people that lived there for 5 or 10,000 years before on this land. Um, and then also, we fail to see that it's going to come down. It could be tonight. There's earthquakes in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. So it could be tonight that house comes down. It could be the last house standing on this hillside in like 300 years. Who knows? And I said, it's the same with our relationships. I said, look at me, look at you. It's like, it's kind of like we don't change, even though we've known each other for 30 years. The way we look at each other, it's like we just see each other now. Um, when, but I said, you were born, you know? So one thing you can do with this reflection is when you look at a person is to imagine them coming out of their mother. I imagine it quite graphically, if you're in a heterosexual couple and you're the guy like me, you actually have a better view of the birth than your wife does. So I had a very, very, very clear view and sense of what it's like to be born. So I said, we do that. I look at you right now, I see you coming out of your mother. And then I imagine that you're going to die. Hopefully not tomorrow, but it could happen. It could happen on the drive home from this event. Hopefully in you know, many decades, maybe alone, maybe with friends. And I said, this is impermanence, like with objects, with things, with people. We're actually constantly changing, but we don't see it. So then I finished. And then he said, wow. He said, I never thought of it. I never thought of that. This guy, he was 60 years old. This guy. I've never thought of that. And so educated and so cosmopolitan. And then I thought, wow, it's really good I'm writing this book actually, because these thoughts that are so, so common to us as Buddhists are brand new, even to very highly educated, very sophisticated people. Um, and so, that's the essence of impermanence. And if you can start to see things through that lens, it's really extraordinary, right? Have any of you ever been to your high school reunion or college reunion? A lot of people don't go. Yeah, understandably, actually. But if you have, it really teaches you about this impermanence. Venerable Rene told me to that. He's the one who gave me this example, actually, because he said, you go, and I recall going to my reunion, it was like 5 years ago, talking to this guy for 20 minutes, and I had no idea. He knew who I was, and I was too embarrassed. We didn't have name tags. That's why they give you name tags. We didn't have name tags. I was talking to him for 20 minutes. I'm like, who is this guy? Like, and I went to a school with 130 students in the whole school. There were only 30 kids in my class. And I could not figure out which of them this guy was. Finally, like someone said his name, Scott. It was my name, actually. He has the same name as me. There's so many Scotts I've known in my life. And then oh yeah, it's that guy. But if you've had that experience yourself, that proves the way our mind is so biased to not see things changing. In my mind, he looked exactly the same as when he was 18 years old when I last saw him. People just don't age in your mind. You even don't age, and when you look in the mirror, right? A lot of us, we don't recognize ourselves. We're like, oh wow, who is that guy? prefer to think of myself younger. Anyway, that also proves it. So it takes real active work to see impermanence all the time, these kind of thoughts. So it's nice. It's a real privilege when I'm up on the stage like this, because I get to do it with everybody to sort of see that work. So another way of looking at this is also just to think about the right now for people. I was leading this topic recently at the Gyimto Foundation, and I asked people. I said, raise your hand if you don't have something you really want to happen in your life. Nobody raised their hands, right? Everybody. And so that's the middle. So this is I call that meditation like birth, now, death, the hero's journey. I like to call it the hero's journey because it's like that Joseph Campbell idea of this archetypal story that we tell. But everybody lives a hero's journey. And each of us right now has these goals. Like we have things we're struggling with, our health, our relationships, work, money. And we have goals. Like everybody here, everyone you meet, everyone you pass on the street, everyone you drive by on your way home, they all have that, right? They all have something they really, really want to happen, or something they really desperately need to get out of. This is the first topic, impermanence, but you see how it connects to compassion. All these topics, the beauty of the lamrim is like every topic interrelates with the other. So you see, even at this basic topic of impermanence, it's a huge engine of compassion to realize the impermanence of our bodies and our lives. And so, what impermanence does for you, the result of it is to cultivate gratitude, resilience, courage. It's actually one of my favorite things in this book is I made a table on page 22. That's like every topic and the problem it addresses and the character benefits. So for impermanence, problems, loss, illness, breakups, grief, injustice. Character benefits, gratitude, humility, acceptance, hope, courage, courage. So, times like today, with many wars and leaders that some of us don't like, many people in great despair. Um, with impermanence, it helps us accept that uh, change is natural, including really big bad change, like the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine. And so this is another way. I'm sure many of you already do this, but when you start feeling really, really tight and upset, it's like, oh, these wars are never going to end. The world's only getting worse. Um, to remember, the older you are, the more you know about history, the better, because a lot of people in this room, I think, were alive in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. I was, and nobody expected that day when the Berlin Wall fell. Not a person on earth predicted that. Nobody in the world said that's going to happen tomorrow. In fact, most people thought the opposite. Totally intractable. We're going to be in the Cold War forever, or we're going to just destroy the whole planet. One or the other. We'll be in like infinite war, like in George Orwell's 1984, or destroy the world. And then we all woke up and turned on the news, and what's going on? The people there didn't even understand it. Like, how do things happen? We'll get to this when we meditate on cause and effect, because when the conditions come together, the result occurs. And it's very hard to explain why that happened or how, but it did. And then the Soviet Union uh, collapsed, the rise of democracy in all those communist countries. Um, I remind myself that 80 years ago, my grandparents, um, well, some were in the Holocaust, some were fighting. We were fighting Germany and Japan, arch enemies, right? So we were willing to kill the very last person, right? The Japanese were willing to sacrifice the very last person to win that war. The Germans were, we were too, the British, French. Like we were ready to kill the last person, to be the last person that died. Like the most bitter enemies you could possibly imagine, Japan and Germany. Now they're our closest allies, right? Japan and Germany, like so gentle and harmonious with our country. I mean, it's extraordinary, and it's really, really worth reminding yourselves of that, especially if you're feeling despair about the current political situation. It has to change. Things are always, we don't know when, it might not be tomorrow morning, but it will. And if you look in the course of your own life, the changes that have occurred for the better, so many of them for the better, then you get some perspective. Like, history's bumpy, but so far it actually is going up and to the right. We're in a bit of a local minimum right now. Violence is increasing over the last 5 years. Democracies are decreasing. It's like 70% to 60% over the last 5 years. But hopefully, and all the statistics would show that that's more like the stock market, where you have like a local low, but it continues up. No guarantee. There's no guarantee to that. But this is where impermanence really helps, because when bad things suddenly happen, and you've been meditating on impermanence for years, decades, you're just immediately ready to help. I think we've all seen this. I think for those of us who have, teachers like, Geshe Sharab, your teacher, Geshe Sulga was a teacher. I was in Boston during September 11th, 2001. And so he made an emergency class on September 12th, 2001 to talk about um, what had just happened. And I was very surprised. I was just a Buddhist for like a year at that point. But he didn't talk about mindfulness. He didn't talk about compassion, a little bit, of course, for like the people that died and their families. But he said impermanence. He said the number one thing to get out of seeing those towers fall is impermanence, that none of us thought there, not a person on earth, except the people planning the attack, thought those towers would come down tomorrow. Not a person thought they'd be down in 100 years or 200 years. Like, all of us for sure thought they would be standing forever. So, that's the other side of impermanence. But the reason I bring that up is that it makes you ready. It makes you prepared to help when things like that happen, which they are happening right now. Things like that are happening. And instead of being in despair, disbelief, impermanence helps you just be ready and also be flexible enough to see, okay, things can change. Um, and they often change for the better. All right, so I think we have time for this meditation before lunch, actually. Back into meditation position. So just become aware of a couple of breaths. Just watch 5 breaths. Maybe we could all count 5 breaths without getting distracted. See if that's possible. So now start by becoming aware of your body. Think of your body's parts one by one. When you do, let your mind go there. When you think of a part of your body, it's like your mind goes there and you don't feel the parts of your body usually. So put your mind on your feet, your legs, your hands, your arms, your torso, your neck, your head, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, ears, and all of your skin, the boundary between you and the rest of the world. Begin to feel the momentary change in your body. See if you can feel your heart beating or imagine it. Blood coursing through your veins. Become aware of breath flowing in and out of your lungs. The nerve impulses zipping from the tips of your fingers and toes and skin to your brain and back. Try to imagine the more subtle change in your body's trillions of living cells, blood, skin, stomach, brain cells, moving, changing, reproducing. Millions of your body's cells dying every second, replaced with millions newly born. Each of those cells are made of countless parts themselves, atoms and their subatomic particles, clouds of energy vibrating, colliding. Now turn your attention to your mind, constantly filled with fresh thoughts, perceptions, feelings, memories, pains, fears, desires. For a minute, watch your mind from a distance without trying to control your thoughts. Notice how new thoughts appear and disappear, and observe and label them without becoming attached to them, without pushing them away. Picture the world immediately around you, the chair or cushion you're seated on, the walls and ceiling, furniture, surrounding space. Imagine them the way science tells us they exist, buzzing clouds of energetic particles that your senses mistake as solid forms. Think of all your possessions, your clothes, your phone, your car, your home, if you're lucky enough to have one, Each of these is subject to change. Nothing lasts forever. Visualize them old, faded, worn out, destroyed. Your house eventually torn down. Your car crushed into a cube of metal. Your phone recycled. Your clothes rags. Notice how your feelings about all these objects change. And sometimes objects do last a lifetime, things. But even then, you can grow tired of them, giving them away, throwing them into the back of the closet to forget for the rest of your life. So see how impermanence isn't just when things wear out, when they're destroyed, or when you grow tired of them. It's something that happens at every instant in the subtle change of their molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles. Now bring to mind the people around you, family, friends, acquaintances, strangers you pass on the street or in stores, people in this room. Each of them was born. Imagine the profound moment their mother gave birth. And each of them will die. Imagine them on their deathbed, alone, surrounded by loved ones. And at this moment, they're constantly changing too, just like your own body and mind. Your friendships, your romantic partners, your work relationships are also in flux. Try to remember friends and romantic partners who were once the most important people in your life, but are now distant acquaintances or even enemies. Relationships can end through conflicts, revelations, or just moving away. You can get tired or bored or just grow apart from the person who once brought you so much joy. But also, somewhere out there in the world, alive and breathing right now, there may be a stranger who will become your dearest friend, your wisest teacher, or an intimate partner for the rest of your life. Let's quietly contemplate impermanence for a moment, and you can let anything come to mind: objects, people, relationships, body, your mind, thoughts, regrets, plans, politicians, climate change, social injustice, or even civilization. And whatever it is that comes into your mind, apply the logic to it. But at some point, you may glimpse a clear, strong sense of the ever-changing nature of one of these things. And when you do, that's what we call the realization. So then you can let go of the analysis and just stay with that experience that transcends words. And when that inevitably fades, then you come back to analyze the impermanence of your body, your mind, the object intellectually, and then release into the sense of impermanence again if it returns. So let's just do that for a minute. So remember that whatever is unpleasant or disturbing won't last forever. It might even change for the better. And whatever's beautiful or pleasing will eventually change or disappear. So you can't offer lasting happiness. Yet life still keeps presenting new impermanent opportunities for beauty and connection. For the dedication of this meditation, we can aspire that whatever progress we've made towards seeing the impermanent nature of reality carry into our day, and that when we enjoy something pleasurable, maybe the lunch we're about to have, or a walk later, a cup of coffee, touch of your partner, see if you can be fully present for it. You won't always experience such pleasures. This might even be the last time you do. And see if you can enjoy without clinging, without yearning for a next time. Because so often the appreciation of life's riches is ruined by plotting the next time we want to get, or worrying that we'll never get it again. So when you recognize that external things can't give you lasting happiness and satisfaction, your attachment to them lessens, but your enjoyment of them might actually increase. By realizing the impermanent nature of pleasure, you can enjoy it more realistically and actually more fully, without unrealistically wishing for pleasure to last forever or yearning for it to repeat again and again. It can become a meditation on this topic to fully and immediately enjoy it for what it is, impermanent. And you can come out of the meditation. And we got a couple minutes if anybody has any comment or question.
Thanks. You helped me to realize that only through impermanence is renewal possible.
Yeah. Did that in a particular context, or what were you thinking?
There were many.
Huh?
There were many.
Many, yeah. Good.
But even that point of joy is not there is no final point. There is no anything other than now.
Yeah.
And so it's more like the particle or wave. It's a wave of renewal rather than the individual particles of their static state.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like a good insight. My daughter, whenever she breaks something, it can be a bit clumsy. uh, She breaks things a lot, actually, but whenever she does, she says impermanence. Because she was raised with these ideas. I've never given my daughter a lecture or even told her to meditate, but she's come to absorb it just out of curiosity. Coming into my room to meditate and also watching me write the book over my shoulder. So she actually knows the whole lamrim, which is really really gratifying. Um, but yeah, as a parent, you have to okay impermanence. Broke another plate. She's not attached, very unattached, which actually makes us frustrated sometimes as parents. But she really has a non-attachment that's enviable. Anything else? Anybody online too who wants to say anything about impermanence? Oh yeah.
There is something that is permanent, perhaps maybe like awareness that is holding all of this, or
Yeah, I mean, technically in Tibetan Buddhism, they do talk about some phenomena as permanent, right? I personally don't find that discussion that useful in this context, because really everything we observe in the universe is changing, including our minds. Like the Buddhist view of the mind is not that there's a solid soul that's permanent. It's so subtle, like we observed in meditation. It's like a river, it's just like a constant chain of changing thoughts. So I think for the purpose of this discussion, it's better because it starts to become kind of an odd philosophical debate. I think to say like, oh, like space is permanent. Sometimes they say that in Buddhism, like space is permanent. Maybe. I mean, this is so nice that the Buddha said, don't trust a word I said. He's like, look for yourself. So I get those teachings and I provisionally accept them. Okay, space is permanent. But I don't know. I don't know about that. I think when you really observe the world around you, the impermanence seems like constantly proven in everything. Like all of science, nothing that begins doesn't end. We haven't found things that have that don't begin. Although we may, there are theories that the universe is infinite. You know, but something being infinite is different than being permanent. That something will always be is actually different than it being permanent. So, so I don't know. I prefer personally not to get into those um, that aspect of Buddhist philosophy where it says like space is permanent and things because I'm not sure I totally understand what that means. And also there's different philosophical views. I think it's more compelling just to see that everything that we observe, they say all compound. They're more precise in Buddhism. They say all compounded phenomena are impermanent. Things that come together like through causes and conditions. But what are we observing that doesn't come together through that? I don't know. What do you think, Venerable Dandra? How would you answer that from the more formal philosophical approach? Or do you want a microphone?
Well, I mean, you're the don't know anything that you don't know. But yeah, I mean, there's intermediate. I mean, as you know, there's intermediate space, and which is like the space between two things, and that is impermanent. And then there's the concept of space,
Yeah.
which is just the mere lack of obstructive contact. That's what's considered to be permanent. But but to your point, like as humans, like we're like there's this idea of what does unobstructed mean when there's molecules of gases and things. Means it doesn't prevent movement, but things are getting out of the way still when you're like
Yeah.
moving through empty space. Like space is not it's and then you've changed it like by moving through it.
Yeah.
You've altered it. um, and then the true cessations, I think the only other example of something that is considered permanent, like the true cessations, and
Yeah. Yeah.
true meditative cessations, and that maybe that's a better example, like
Yeah.
less arguable. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, it gets like really nitpicky, and I enjoy thinking about those things. But yeah, they say like space is unobstructedness. It's so. What does that mean? What does that mean? I've heard in interstellar space that it's bare enough that sometimes there's one particle per cubic meter, just like one atom in a cubic meter of space. So that to me that does start to get at that unobstructedness. Like, wow, what's the rest? What's like it's not nothing. We already decided that nothing doesn't exist. So yeah, maybe there is something that is like permanent. That's that field of unobstructedness, but it's so subtle. It doesn't bear on our everyday realities, that much, just to say the least. Yeah.
The other thing I would add is that even in space where there's one particle per cubic meter, particles do arise out of
Yeah.
that empty space.
Yeah, just
They
spontaneous.
arise and then they fall, just like a thought. Particles come into existence, they drop out of existence.
Yeah. So even though I'm really, really personally fascinated by this kind of debates, I don't find them of practical benefit most of the time. So I do usually just set them as because you can get into this debate and it's like, well, how does this benefit me? How does this help me live a meaningful life and eliminate delusions and create happiness? And for a long time, a lot of those things and that we learn in tenets, like uh, all the different schools of emptiness, but especially like the boomies, like the difference, even that, like the different stages of realization as you get into higher realization. Even that, I kind of thought, oh gosh, why do I need to know this? Like, I'm not even on the first. It's like, well, once I get onto the first one, then I'll probably have some idea like what I'm heading for in the second one. Now I've actually came to change my mind about that, though. I do think it's very, very beneficial to learn all of those things. But it's hard, I think, in the first years or even decades with Buddhism, it's hard to see how those bear on your everyday reality of dealing with delusions, happiness, how to live a meaningful life. Okay, I guess it's lunchtime. So we'll come back and go on to cause and effect. So that bearing on the question you were talking about, what's real and how do we decide what to do? How do things happen? It's a great, great topic. Is it 1:30 that we come back or one? Well, okay, great. So I have lunch and then a little break. Thanks, everybody.